Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step out onto a narrow strip of rock and frozen grass where the Atlantic breathes in slow, heavy swells below you, and a tall lighthouse rises at your back like something half built by people and half claimed by the wind. The air is sharp enough to wake every part of you, and the sky has not yet decided whether it belongs to night or morning. You stand there for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of the place and realizing that this will be your world now. A lonely tower, a restless sea, and a routine that does not care how tired you are. And just to set expectations, you probably will not survive this job comfortably. Not because it is dramatic or heroic, but because it quietly wears you down in ways you do not notice until much later. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, feel free to share where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights. You shift your weight as the wind presses lightly against your coat. Not violent, not yet, but constant enough to remind you that this place never truly rests. The lighthouse stands just behind you, its white paint dulled by salt and time, its edges softened by years of storms that have come and gone without asking permission. You turn toward it, your boots crunching softly over frost that has settled overnight, and begin walking. The door is heavier than you expect. It resists at first, swollen slightly from damp air, and then gives with a slow, deliberate movement that feels almost like the building is deciding whether to let you in. Inside, the air changes immediately. It is warmer, but not comfortably so. There is a faint smell of oil, metal, and something older that has seeped into the walls over decades. You pause just inside, letting your eyes adjust. A widely accepted historical detail notes that by the 1870s, lighthouse keepers in New England were responsible for maintaining complex lighting systems that required constant attention, often working long hours without relief. You can already sense what that means. This is not a place you simply occupy, it is a place that demands your presence. The entry room is small and practical. Hooks for coats, a narrow bench, a lantern hanging on the wall, its glass slightly clouded. Nothing here is decorative. Everything has a purpose, and even that purpose feels worn, like it has been repeated too many times to feel special anymore. You close the door behind you and the sound is solid, final. The wind becomes quieter, not gone, but pushed to the edges of your awareness. You take a breath and notice how the air carries a faint trace of salt even here inside the tower. It never quite leaves. Your hand brushes along the wall as you move deeper in, fingertips catching the roughness of painted stone. The texture is uneven, slightly damp in places. You imagine how many hands have done this same motion before you, steadying themselves, moving through the same narrow spaces in the same dim light. There is a staircase ahead. Of course there is. It curves upward, in a tight spiral, disappearing into shadow. You look up, but the top is not visible from here. Just a suggestion of height, a promise that you will be climbing far more than you would prefer. You do not climb yet. Instead, you step into the adjoining room, the keeper's living space. It is modest, a table, a small stove, a bed tucked into the corner. Everything arranged with a kind of careful efficiency that suggests the person who lived here before you did not have the luxury of excess. The stove gives off a faint warmth enough to take the edge off the cold, but not enough to fully chase it away. You run your hand along the table's surface, and it's smooth in some places, worn down by years of use, and rough in others where the grain of the wood has risen slightly. You can almost picture the quiet routines that played out here. Meals eaten without conversation, tools laid out and gathered eaten, moments of rest that never lasted quite long enough. There is a small window, and you move toward it almost without thinking. Outside, the sea stretches out in a dark, shifting mass. The horizon is beginning to soften, a faint hint of light spreading slowly, carefully, as if testing the edges of the sky. It is not sunrise yet, but it is no longer night in the same way. You lean slightly closer to the glass. Somewhere out there, ships are moving. You cannot see them, not clearly, but you know they are there. The trade routes along this coast are busy even at this hour. A commonly recognised aspect of maritime life in this period is that sailors relied heavily on lighthouse signals to navigate dangerous coastal waters, especially along the rocky shores of New England. That thought settles into you with a quiet weight. This place matters, not in a loud or obvious way, but in a steady, ongoing way that does not pause for your comfort. The light above you, the one you have not yet climbed to tend, is not optional. It is a promise made to people you will never meet. You step back from the window and glance again toward the staircase. There is a faint sound coming from above. Not loud, not alarming, just a subtle mechanical presence. A soft ticking, a gentle shifting of something that continues whether you are ready or not. You listen for a moment trying to understand it, but it remains just out of reach, like a language you almost recognize. It would be comforting if the tower were completely still. It is not. There is always something moving. A curious little historical tidbit suggests that some lighthouse keepers in the 19th century named parts of their equipment, treating gear as lamps, and even the tower itself as companions to soften the isolation. You glance upward and again and wonder briefly if you will end up doing the same. It does not seem as strange as it might have once sounded. You exhale slowly and move toward the base of the staircase. The first step creaks slightly under your weight. Not in a worrying way, just enough to announce that you are here. You place your hand on the central column and begin to climb. The spiral draws you in immediately. Each step feels similar, almost identical, and yet your body is aware of the effort. The space is narrow. The air grows warmer as you ascend, carrying a stronger scent of oil and heated metal. Your breathing adjusts without you consciously deciding it should. You keep going. Upward. The light is dim, coming from small openings placed at intervals along the wall. Each one offers a brief glimpse of the outside world, a slice of sea or sky that shifts as you climb. You find yourself glancing at them as you pass, as if needing reassurance that the world still exists beyond this winding path. Historians still argue whether the psychological strain of lighthouse keeping came more from the isolation itself or from the repetitive, unchanging nature of the daily routine. As you continue upward, you begin to understand why that question exists. There is something about the ocean, this endless circling climb, that feels both grounding and slightly disorienting at the same time. You reach a small landing and pause, not because you are exhausted, though you are aware of the effort, but because something in you wants to take a moment before continuing. The air here feels different, warmer, brighter though still subdued. The sound from above is clearer now, the ticking, the quiet turning of something precise and deliberate. You rest your hand against the wall, again feeling its steady presence. This is only the beginning. You are not yet fully inside the rhythm of this place, but you can sense it forming around you gently, persistently. The tower does not rush you. It does not need to. It knows you will adapt because you must. You lift your foot and take the next step, and then another. The staircase narrows slightly as you continue upward, though that may simply be your awareness sharpening as your body adjusts to the climb. Your hand remains steady against the central column, fingers brushing over cool metal that has been worn smooth in places by years of use. Each step follows the last with quiet predictability. Lift, place, shift your weight, again and again until the motion becomes less of a decision and more of a rhythm. Your breathing deepens, not strained but measured. The air grows warmer as you ascend, carrying a stronger scent of oil and faint heat, as if the work of the lighthouse gathers above you like a living presence. The soft ticking you noticed below is clearer now. It is steady, patient, never rushing and never pausing. It marks time in a way that feels different from the ticking of a household clock. More purposeful, less forgiving. You pass another narrow window. This one faces the open sea more directly, and for a moment you slow your pace just enough to glance outward. The horizon has shifted again. A thin band of pale light stretches along the edge of the world, soft and uncertain. The water reflects it in broken fragments, each wave catching and releasing that faint brightness. It is not yet day, but it is approaching with quiet determination. You continue climbing, A well-established historical fact is that lighthouse towers of this period were designed with spiral staircases not only to conserve space but also to provide structural strength against coastal storms. As you move upward within this curve of stone and iron, you can feel that intention. The tower does not sway. It does not creak in protest. It simply stands holding its shape against everything the sea might send. You reach another landing slightly wider than the last. Here the air feels warmer still, and the scent of oil is unmistakable. There is a small shelf set into the wall holding a few tools. A cloth darkened by repeated use, a pair of scissors, a small metal container with a lid that has been opened and closed so many times it no longer sits perfectly straight. You pause not out of necessity but out of curiosity. You pick up the cloth first. It is coarse stiff in places where oil has soaked in and dried. When you rub it lightly between your fingers, it leaves a faint residue. Not unpleasant, but persistent. This is the kind of thing that does not wash away easily. It becomes part of your hands, your clothes, your daily life. You set it back carefully and lift the scissors. They are heavier than they look, balanced in a way that suggests precision matters here. You open and close them once listening to the soft metallic click. It is a simple sound, but it feels important, as if it belongs to a routine you have not yet fully learned. You replace them and stand still for a moment longer. There is no voice guiding you, no set of written instructions waiting nearby. The knowledge of what to do here exists, but it lives in habits and repeated actions, in the quiet understanding passed from one keeper to another. You are stepping into something that expects you to learn by doing. A lesser-known detail from the era mentions that many keepers developed their own small rituals when tending the light, believing that consistency in motion helped prevent costly mistakes. You can see how that might happen. In a place where the same tasks repeat day after day, small patterns begin to feel like anchors. You turn back towards the staircase. The steps continue upward. Of course they do. There is no shortcut, no alternate path, just the steady spiral leading you toward the lantern room above. You take a breath and resume your climb. The light grows brighter with each turn, not from the outside but from above. A warmer glow, faint but present, filters down through the structure. It shifts slightly as you move, catching on edges, reflecting off metal surfaces, and disappearing again as the curve of the staircase changes your angle. You begin to notice the temperature more clearly now. It is warmer than the lower levels, though not stifling. The heat seems concentrated, controlled, as if it belongs to a specific place, rather than spreading freely through the tower. You pass another small opening, this one facing inland. The land looks quieter than the sea. Low shapes, dark and still, with only the faintest hint of movement where the wind brushes across grass or trees. It feels distant, even though it is not far away. A reminder that there is a world beyond this tower, one that continues without you. You do not linger. The staircase tightens once more and you find yourself leaning slightly inward as you climb. Your hand remains steady against the central support, your steps measured and consistent. There is something almost meditative about it now. The repetition, the gentle strain, the way your attention narrows to the immediate task. Historians continue to debate whether lighthouse keeping was considered a desirable profession or one taken out of necessity, as records show both pride and hardship woven together in the lives of those who held the post. As you move upward, you begin to sense that duality. There is a quiet dignity in this work, but it is not an easy one. The sound from above shifts slightly. What was once a distant ticking now carries a subtle mechanical hum, as if gears are turning somewhere just out of sight. It is not loud, but it is constant, and it adds a new layer to the atmosphere. You are approaching the heart of the lighthouse now, the place where its purpose is most visible. Your pace slows without you deciding it should. Not from fatigue, but from awareness. The staircase begins to open slightly, the curve widening just enough to suggest that you are nearing the top. The light from above grows clearer, warmer, casting soft reflections along the walls. You can see the outline of a doorway ahead, framed in metal, leading into the lantern room. You take the final few steps carefully. The doorway is lower than you expect, and you instinctively duck your head as you pass through. The change is immediate. The space opens around you circular and enclosed in glass. The air is warmer here, carrying a stronger scent of heated oil and metal. At the centre stands the lamp. It is larger than you imagined. Not towering, but substantial, with a presence that draws your attention immediately. The glass around it is clean polished to a clarity that feels almost unnatural compared to the rest of the tower. The mechanism beneath it moves with quiet precision, a system of gears and weights that turn slowly, guiding the light in its steady rotation. You step closer. The warmth is noticeable now, radiating gently outward. The flame itself is steady, controlled, its brightness contained within the carefully designed lens that surrounds it. The light does not scatter randomly. It focuses, bends, and extends outward in a beam that sweeps across the water beyond. A commonly accepted fact is that many lighthouses in the 19th century used Fresnel lenses, intricate glass systems designed to amplify light and project it over great distances. You can see the effect here. The lens catches the flame and transforms it into something far more powerful than its size would suggest. You reach out, stopping just short of touching the glass. There is a sense of precision here that demands respect. Every part of this system works together, and every part depends on careful attention. A smudge, a misaligned wick, a neglected mechanism, any of these could weaken the light in ways that matter more than you might expect. You stand there for a moment watching the slow rotation. Out beyond the glass, the sea continues its quiet movement. The faint light of approaching morning spreads further along the horizon, but the lighthouse beam remains distinct, cutting through the dimness with unwavering consistency. You realize slowly that this is where your work truly begins. Not at the door, not on the staircase. Here. You remain standing near the lamp for a moment longer, letting your eyes adjust to the steady brightness and your senses settle into the warmth of the lantern room. The contrast with the lower levels is unmistakable. Down there, the air was cool and damp, touched by stone and salt. Up here, everything feels concentrated. Heat gathers around the flame. The scent of oil lingers in a way that suggests it never truly leaves. The mechanism continues its quiet motion. You notice it more clearly now. A slow, deliberate turning, guided by gears hidden just below the platform. The sound is not intrusive, but it is constant, like a steady breath that fills the space without drawing attention to itself. You find yourself listening for it without meaning to, as if your mind wants to anchor itself to something reliable. You step closer to the central assembly. The glass panels surrounding the light are immaculate. Not perfectly new, but maintained with such care that they appear almost untouched by time. When you lean slightly to the side, you catch your own faint reflection distorted by the curved surfaces. It is a strange sight. You standing inside the light that others will only ever see from a distance. A widely recognized historical detail is that lighthouse keepers were required to clean the lens and lantern glass daily, sometimes multiple times, to ensure the light remained clear and visible to passing ships. Looking at the surface now, you can understand why. Even the slightest film would dull the beam, soften its reach, and out here that difference matters. You reach for the cloth you carried up with you. It feels heavier now, as if it understands its purpose. You press it gently against one section of the glass and begin to move it in slow, careful circles. The motion is deliberate. You are not scrubbing, you are tending. The difference is subtle but important. The glass responds under your hand. It offers just enough resistance to remind you that it's there, solid and real, but smooth enough that the cloth glides across it with quiet ease. You move from one section to the next, following the curve of the lens, adjusting your stance as needed. The warmth from the lamp brushes against your skin as you work. Not uncomfortable, but persistent. It settles into your hands, your face, the edges of your awareness. You begin to understand how someone could spend hours here and lose track of time entirely. A small lesser-known anecdote from the period suggests that some keepers judged the cleanliness of their lens not only by sight but by how the cloth sounded against the glass. A soft, even whisper meant the surface was clear, while a faint drag indicated residue. You pause for a moment and listen. There it is! A gentle, consistent sound. almost like a breath passing through fabric. You adjust your pressure, slightly testing it, and the sound changes just enough to confirm what you suspected. This is not guesswork. It is a skill learned, slowly refined over time. You continue. Once the glass is tended, your attention shifts to the lamp itself. The flame remains steady, but you know better than to assume that steadiness will maintain itself without intervention. You crouch slightly, bringing yourself closer to the base of the burner. The metal here is warm to the touch. Not hot enough to burn, but enough to make you aware of the energy contained within. You locate the wick adjustment, a small mechanism that allows you to raise or lower it with fine control. You turn it gently. The flame responds almost immediately. It grows slightly taller, then settles again as you ease it back down. The change is subtle, but it matters. Too high and the flame could smoke, leaving soot on the glass. Too low and the light would weaken its reach, diminished. A commonly accepted fact is that maintaining the correct wick height was one of the most critical tasks for a lighthouse keeper, requiring constant attention to balance, brightness, and efficiency. You can feel that balance chill now. It is not something you can rush. You adjust once more, then stop. The flame steadies. You watch it for a moment, ensuring that it holds its shape, that it does not flicker or strain. It feels almost like watching a living thing, something that depends on you in a quiet, ongoing way. You straighten slowly. The lantern room is subdued aside from the soft movement of the mechanism and the faint whisper of the flame. Outside, the light of morning continues to gather, but it has not yet overtaken the beam. For now, the lighthouse still commands the darkness. You move to the edge of the room where the glass meets the metal frame. From here, you can look outward more clearly. The sea stretches in all directions, its surface shifting with a slow, endless rhythm. The faint outline of a distant vessel appears for a moment, then disappears again as it moves through the low light. You wonder briefly if they see you. Not you exactly, but the light you tend. A signal, a guide, a quiet assurance that someone is here keeping watch. There is a certain weight in that thought. Scholars continue to discuss whether lighthouse keepers viewed their role primarily as a technical responsibility or as a moral duty to those at sea. As you stand here, it feels difficult to separate the two. The work is precise, mechanical, grounded in routine, and yet the purpose behind it carries something more human. You turn back towards the center of the room. There are other tasks waiting. You notice the reservoir that feeds the lamp, a container that holds the oil necessary to keep the flame alive. You check its level, carefully tilting your head slightly to see where it stands. It is not empty, but it is not full either. You make a mental note. This will need attention soon. You move to a small set of tools placed neatly along the inner wall. Each one has its place. Each one shows signs of use. You pick up a small brush and run your fingers along its bristles. They are stiff, darkened by repeated exposure to soot and oil. You return to the lamp and use the brush to gently clear away any residue that has begun to gather near the burner. The motion is careful, controlled. You are not removing large amounts, just maintaining what is already here. The work is quiet. It does not demand urgency, but it does require focus. You cannot drift too far into thought. Not yet. There is a rhythm to be learned, and you are still finding your place within it. You step back once more, taking in the entire lantern room. The glass, the lamp, the slow turning of the mechanism, the way the light moves outward, sweeping across the water in a steady arc. It feels complete, but not finished. It will never be finished. This is a process, not a single act. A faint creak passes through the structure, barely noticeable, as if the tower is adjusting itself to the changing air outside. You glance toward the horizon again. The sky has shifted further now. The pale light of morning spreads more confidently, softening the edges of the sea and the land beyond. Soon the lamp will no longer be the primary source of light. Soon your role will change again. But not yet. You remain where you are, hands resting lightly at your sides, listening to the quiet life of the lighthouse around you. You are beginning to understand it. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to know that this place will shape you slowly and steadily, just as it has shaped those who came before. You leave the lantern room with a final glance over your shoulder, as if expecting the light to change the moment you step away from it. It does not. The beam continues its slow, unwavering sweep across the water, indifferent to your movement. That steadiness lingers with you as you duck through the doorway and begin your descent. Going down feels different. Your legs relax slightly, though the narrow curve of the staircase still keeps you alert. Your hand remains on the central column, guiding your balance as the steps wind beneath you. The warmth fades gradually with each turn, replaced by cooler air that carries the familiar scent of damp stone and salt. It feels less concentrated, more diffuse, as if the tower is exhaling as you move away from its highest point. You pass the landing with the tools again. The cloth, the scissors, the small container. They sit exactly as you left them, unchanged, waiting. You notice how easily they blend into the background now. Already they are becoming part of the expected order of things. A grounded historical observation notes that lighthouse keepers often structured their entire day around cycles of maintenance, inspection and rest, repeating the same sequence with minimal variation. As you continue downward, you can sense how that repetition would settle into your body. Not as boredom exactly, but as a steady pattern that shapes your attention. You reach the lower level and step back into the living quarters. The contrast is immediate. The air here is cooler, the light softer, filtered through the small window rather than radiating from a central source. The stove gives off a low, steady warmth, its presence subtle but reassuring. You move toward it almost instinctively. The metal surface is warm beneath your hand, not hot but enough to feel alive. You glance inside, lifting the small door just enough to check the fire. The embers glow faintly, their light a quiet echo of the lantern above. You add a small piece of wood, adjusting it carefully so it settles among the coals. The sound is gentle, a soft crackle, a faint shift as the new piece catches. You close the door and straighten. The room feels different now that you have seen the lantern. Before it might have seemed like a simple shelter. Now it feels like part of a system. A place to rest, yes, but also a place that supports everything happening above. You move to the table and run your fingers along its surface again. The texture is familiar now, less noticeable. You pull out the chair and sit, the wood creaking slightly under your weight. It is not uncomfortable, but it does not invite you to linger either. It is functional, nothing more. You glance toward the small shelf along the wall. There are a few items arranged there. A tin cup, a folded cloth, a small book with a worn cover. You reach for the book and open it, flipping through the pages slowly. The writing inside is neat, deliberate, not decorative but careful. Entries, dates, notes, observations, a commonly recognized practice of the time, required lighthouse keepers to maintain detailed logs of weather conditions, lamp maintenance and any notable events during their watch. You trace one line with your finger, reading silently. The words are simple, but they carry a quiet weight. Wind increasing from the northeast, lamp trimmed at dusk, fog thick by midnight. You close the book gently and return it to its place. There is something about the record that feels both distant and immediate. These are not stories meant to be shared. They are notes meant to be useful, to ensure continuity, to provide a thread between one day and the next. You stand and move toward the window again. The light outside has grown stronger. The horizon is no longer a vague suggestion. It has shape now, definition. The sea reflects the early morning sky in muted tones, its surface still restless but less obscured. You watch for a moment, letting your gaze settle. Somewhere in the broader culture of lighthouse keeping, there are small, almost forgotten habits that people develop to cope with the quiet. One such odd detail mentions that a few keepers would speak aloud to the sea during their morning watch, not out of superstition, but simply to hear a human voice in a place that offered so little of it. You consider that idea briefly. You do not speak. Not yet. Instead you listen. The wind moves across the outside walls with a soft, continuous pressure. It does not howl or roar. It simply exists, a steady presence that shapes everything it touches. The faint sound of waves reaches you through the glass, muted but persistent. You turn away and begin moving through the room with more purpose now. There are small tasks to attend to. You straighten the cloth on the table, adjust the position of the chair, check the supplies stacked neatly in the corner. Each action is simple, almost automatic, but together they create a sense of order that feels necessary. Those who study lighthouse life often discuss whether the isolation fostered a deeper sense of self-reliance or quietly eroded a person's connection to the outside world. As you move through these small routines, you can sense how both might be true. There is satisfaction in managing everything yourself, in knowing that each detail is under your control. And yet there is also a narrowing of experience, a gradual turning inward. You pause near the door. Your coat hangs where you left it, slightly damp from the earlier air. You lift it, feeling its weight, the stiffness where salt has begun to settle into the fabric. You shake it out gently and place it back on the hook. The act feels oddly significant, as if you are setting something in place, marking the beginning of your time here in a way that does not require words. You move back to the center of the room and stand still for a moment. The lighthouse surrounds you, not in a confining way, but in a steady, encompassing way. Stonewood, metal, glass. Each element serves a purpose. Each one connects to the others. You take a slow breath. The rhythm is beginning to take hold. Not fully, not comfortably, but enough that you can feel its outline. Above you, the lantern continues its quiet rotation. Below, the sea moves without pause. Between those two you exist, tending, observing, adjusting. You glance once more toward the staircase. You will climb it again. Soon. You step outside again, easing the heavy door open with a steady push, and the morning greets you without ceremony. The light has strengthened while you're inside, spreading across the sea in pale silver tones that soften the edges of everything it touches. The cold lingers, though less sharply, now settling against your skin in a way that feels more familiar than hostile. You pause on the threshold for a moment. The air smells different out here. Salt, of course, always present, but now mixed with something cleaner. Something that belongs to the early hour. The kind of air that feels almost untouched, as if the day has not yet had time to complicate it. You step forward. The ground beneath your boots is uneven. A mix of worn stone and patches of frost that are already beginning to loosen. You adjust your footing without thinking, your body learning quickly how to move in a place where balance matters more than speed. Your attention shifts naturally toward the water. The Atlantic stretches wide and patient before you, its surface marked by long rolling swells that move with quiet persistence. The waves are not dramatic this morning. No crashing walls of foam, no sudden violence, just a steady rhythm that feels almost deliberate, as if the sea is taking its time. You stand still and watch. A well-known historical reality of lighthouse duty is that keepers were expected to monitor the sea constantly, observing changes in weather tide and visibility to anticipate potential dangers. It is not enough to react. You are meant to notice, to read the subtle signs before they become something more. You narrow your gaze slightly. There is a pattern to the water. You can see it now. The way the swells align, the way they break differently against the rocks to your left than they do along the open stretch ahead. The tide is shifting, though slowly. You do not need to measure it to feel it. A small line of foam forms and dissolves again. You follow it with your eyes. This is how it begins, you realize. Not with grand events, but with quiet observation. The kind that requires patience more than effort. Somewhere in the broader lore of coastal life, there is an unusual belief that experienced keepers could predict weather changes simply by the sound of waves against the shore, claiming that certain tones hinted at storms long before clouds appeared. Whether that is true or not, you find yourself listening more closely. The water does sound different. Not dramatically, not in a way you could easily describe, but enough that your attention lingers on it. A slightly deeper resonance, a subtle shift in rhythm. You tilt your head, considering. The sky above offers its own clues. Thin streaks of cloud stretch across the horizon, pale and almost translucent. They do not threaten anything, not yet, but they are not entirely passive either. They move with intention, carried by currents you cannot feel from where you stand. You take a slow breath and let it out. This is part of the work. Not the kind you can hold in your hands, but the kind that settles into your awareness over time. The kind that teaches you to notice before you understand. You begin to walk along the edge of the headland, keeping a careful distance from where the ground slopes more sharply toward the water. The wind brushes against you again, steady and persistent, tugging lightly at your coat. Each step feels deliberate. The terrain demands it. You glance back at the lighthouse. From this angle it looks different. Less imposing perhaps, but more integrated into the landscape. The tower rises cleanly against the morning sky, its presence both practical and symbolic. It does not dominate the scene, it anchors it. Those who have studied maritime communities often reflect on whether lighthouse keepers saw themselves as part of the sea or apart from it, given their constant proximity yet physical separation. As you stand here, the distinction feels less clear. You're not on the water, but you're not entirely removed from it either. You turn your gaze outward again. A faint shape catches your attention. Far off, near the edge of visibility, something moves. You focus, narrowing your eyes slightly. It is a vessel small at this distance, its form blending with the shifting light. You watch it for a moment, tracking its movement. It does not appear to be in distress. Its course is steady, its motion consistent with the slow rhythm of the morning sea. Still you note its presence. You mark its position relative to the rocks, the shoreline, the sweep of the light that will still be visible to it for a little while longer. You remain still until it passes beyond the angle of your view. Then you exhale, not realizing you'd been holding your breath. You continue walking. The ground changes subtly beneath your feet, shifting from firmer stone to patches of coarse grass that bend under the weight of the wind. The texture is uneven, but manageable. You adjust without thinking, your body already beginning to adapt to the demands of this place. You stop again near a cluster of rocks. Here the water comes closer, the waves reaching up with slightly more force as they meet the uneven surface. You watch as one swell rises, curls and breaks against the stone, sending a spray of droplets into the air. They catch the light briefly before falling back. You feel a few of them against your face. Cold, sharp, gone almost as quickly as they arrived. You wipe your cheek with the back of your hand and smile faintly, though there is no one here to see it. This too is part of the rhythm, the small unexpected moments that remind you where you are. A respected observation in a maritime history notes that many keepers developed an almost instinctive awareness of their surroundings, built not through formal training, but through constant exposure and repetition. You can feel the beginnings of that awareness now. It is not fully formed, but it is present. You turn back towards the lighthouse. The door stands where you left it, solid and familiar. The tower rises above it, unchanged its purpose, steady regardless of the shifting light and moving sea. You begin walking back. Your pace is unhurried. There is no need to rush. The work continues whether you hurry or not, and you're starting to understand that it is better to move with it than against it. As you approach the door, you glance once more toward the horizon. The morning has fully arrived now. The light has spread soft but certain across the water and the land. The beam from the lantern is fading into the brightness still present but no longer dominant. Your role is shifting again, from tending the night's guidance to preparing for what comes next. You reach the door and place your hand against it. The wood is cool beneath your fingers. You push it open, step in. The door closes behind you with a firm, grounded sound that feels almost reassuring after the open air. Inside, the lighthouse gathers around you again, its quiet structure holding steady against the restless world outside. The shift is immediate. The wind softens to a distant presence. The scent of salt lingers, but now it mixes once more with oil wood and the faint warmth of the stove. You pause just inside, letting your eyes adjust. The light in the room has changed. Morning has settled in, more fully filtering through the small window in a pale even wash. It reveals details you did not notice earlier. Fine scratches along the table's surface, a slight warp in the wooden floor near the door, the subtle discoloration on the walls where years of damp air have left their quiet mark. You move toward the window again, drawn by habit already beginning to form. Outside, the sky has shifted further. The thin clouds you noticed earlier have thickened slightly, gathering into a more defined layer that stretches across the horizon. They are still light in colour, still gentle in appearance, but there is a weight to them now that was not there before. You rest your hand against the window frame. The wood feels cool, faintly rough beneath your fingers. You lean just enough to widen your view, scanning the waterline again. The sea has changed as well. Not dramatically, not in a way that demands immediate action, but enough that your attention lingers on it. The swells are slightly larger now. Still controlled, still measured, but different. A practical historical note explains that lighthouse keepers were expected to anticipate worsening weather by observing subtle atmospheric changes hours before a storm fully developed, especially along the unpredictable New England coast. You begin to understand how that responsibility settles into your awareness. It is not about reacting to what is obvious. It is about noticing what is becoming. You straighten and step back. Preparation begins before anything feels urgent. You move through the room with a quiet sense of purpose, your actions guided less by instruction and more by instinct that is only just beginning to take shape. You check the stove first, opening it briefly to ensure the fire remains steady. The added wood has caught the flame low but consistent. You adjust it slightly, nudging one piece to improve the airflow. The sound is soft. A small crackle, a gentle shift. You close the door again and turn. Your gaze moves to the supplies stacked neatly in the corner. You crouch slightly, inspecting them more carefully this time. Oil containers sealed but worn, extra cloths folded and ready. Tools each with a purpose you're still learning. You lift one of the oil containers. It's heavier than it looks. You test its weight, then set it back in place. Not yet. There is still enough in the reservoir above, but you're beginning to think ahead now, to plan in quiet increments rather than waiting for necessity to force your hand. An unusual piece of lighthouse lore suggested that some keepers developed the habit of preparing for storms long before any official sign appeared, driven more by intuition than evidence, sometimes to the amusement of visitors who did not share their caution. You consider that idea as you move. It does not seem unreasonable. You step toward the door again and open it once more, this time with a clearer intention. The wind meets you immediately, a little stronger than before, though still far from threatening. It presses lightly against your coat as you step outside. The sky draws your attention at once. The clouds have thickened further, their edges, less defined, now blending into one another in a way that softens the light. The brightness of the morning remains, but it feels filtered, as if something is beginning to stand between the sun and the sea. You walk a few paces forward and stop. The water reflects this change. The surface has lost some of its earlier clarity, its silver tone shifting toward a more muted grey. The swells rise a little higher, their movement slightly more pronounced. Not chaotic, not dangerous, but no longer entirely calm. You watch closely. Those who have examined maritime records often wonder whether keepers relied more on visual cues or on the feel of the air itself when judging approaching weather. As you stand here, you realize it is both. The wind carries information. The sea reflects it. The sky confirms it. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavier. Not enough to alarm you, but enough to register. You turn back toward the lighthouse and begin moving with more purpose now. The preparation is subtle, but it is real. You secure what can be secured. A loose item near the door is moved inside. A small latch is checked, then checked again. Each action is simple, but together they form a quiet defense against what may come. You step back inside once more. The interior feels steadier now, as if the walls themselves offer a kind of reassurance. You move to the table and rest your hands against it, grounding yourself for a moment. Above you, the lantern continues its slow rotation. The light is less visible now in the growing day, but its motion remains unchanged. It does not react to the weather. It does not adjust its pace. It simply continues a constant in a shifting environment. You glance toward the staircase. You will need to go up again, not immediately, but soon, to check, to adjust, to ensure that everything remains as it should be before the evening returns and the light takes on its full importance again. A thoughtful observation from historical accounts points out that the role of a lighthouse keeper required a balance between patience and readiness, a willingness to wait while remaining prepared for sudden change. You can feel that balance settling into you now. You are not rushing, but you are not idle. You move toward the base of the staircase and place your hand on the central column once more. The metal is cool beneath your fingers, steady and familiar. You look upward, following the curve of the steps as they disappear into the higher levels. The tower waits, not passively, but with a quiet expectation. You take the first step, then another. Your foot settles onto the first step and then the next. the familiar spiral drawing you upward again, with a rhythm that now feels less foreign than it did before. The movement is steady, almost comforting in its repetition. Your hand rests along the central column, fingers tracing its smooth, worn surface, as if following a path that countless others have already mapped out for you. The air shifts as you climb. It warms gradually, carrying that distinct scent of oil and metal that signals your return to the lantern above. The lower levels already feel slightly distant, as though you have stepped out of one layer of the lighthouse and into another. Each turn of the staircase separates those spaces just a little more. You pass the landing with the tools again, and this time you do not pause. The cloth, the scissors, the small container. You recognize them now without needing to examine them. They are no longer unfamiliar objects. They are part of the routine that is forming around you. A well-documented aspect of lighthouse duty during this period is that keepers were required to check the lantern multiple times a day, even in daylight hours, to ensure that every component remained in proper working order. The light may not be needed right now in the same way it was before dawn, but that does not lessen its importance. If anything, this is when you prepare for what is coming. You continue upward. The faint mechanical sound grows clearer again. That steady, deliberate motion you noticed earlier returns to your awareness, guiding your attention toward the space above. It is not a sound that demands focus, but it is one that rewards it. The kind that reminds you something important is always in progress. You reach the final curve of the staircase and step through the doorway into the lantern room. The warmth greets you first, then the light. It is softer now, less dominant in the presence of morning, but still precise, still controlled. The beam continues its slow rotation, sweeping outward across a sea that is no longer dark, but not yet fully bright. It remains visible, a pale arc moving across the water with quiet persistence. You step closer. The glass catches the daylight differently now. Instead of reflecting only the flame, it gathers the outside light as well, bending it, scattering it in subtle ways that create faint patterns along the interior surfaces. You notice how those patterns shift as the mechanism turns, always changing, never quite repeating. A small but curious detail from lighthouse records mentions that some keepers became so familiar with these shifting reflections that they could tell if something was misaligned simply by how the light moved across the walls. You watch carefully for a moment, wondering if you might begin to notice such things yourself in time. For now, everything appears as it should. You move toward the lamp. The flame is steady, its shape consistent, its brightness balanced. You crouch slightly, bringing your attention to the burner once more. The wick sits where you left it, neither too high nor too low. You adjust it just slightly, a small correction rather than a change. The flame responds, then settles again. You wait. There is a patience required here that feels different from ordinary waiting. It is not passive, it is attentive. You are not simply passing time, you are observing it. The reservoir catches your attention next. You lean in, checking the level more carefully than before. It has not changed much, but you're thinking ahead now. The evening will come, and with it hours of steady burning. It is better to prepare early than to find yourself scrambling later. You make a quiet decision, not to refill yet, but to be ready. Those who examine lighthouse logs often point out that the most reliable keepers were not necessarily the fastest or the strongest, but the ones who anticipated needs before they became urgent. You can feel that mindset beginning to take hold. It is not about reacting quickly. It is about thinking a step ahead. You stand and move to the outer edge of the lantern room. The sea has changed again. The swells are more pronounced now, rising higher before they fall. The surface carries a texture that was not present earlier, a subtle roughness that suggests the wind is gaining strength even if it does not yet feel forceful where you stand. You rest your hand lightly against the metal frame and watch. There is a rhythm to the movement, but it is less even now. Slight variations appear, small disruptions that hint at something building beneath the surface. You follow them with your eyes, trying to understand what they mean. Some accounts from coastal communities describe how experienced observers could sense an approaching shift in weather not by what they saw, but by a faint unease in the pattern of the sea itself. Whether that is intuition or experience is not entirely clear, but you recognize a trace of that feeling now. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming. just a quiet sense that the day is not as settled as it first appeared. You turn back towards the centre of the room. The mechanism continues its steady rotation, unaffected by the changes outside. The gears move with quiet precision, their motion consistent and unhurried. You watch them for a moment, noting how each part fits into the next, how the entire system depends on balance. It is almost calming. You reach out and rest your hand lightly on the railing that surrounds the lamp. The metal is warm, carrying the heat of the flame and the energy of the system. It feels solid, reliable. A thoughtful observation sometimes made in studies of lighthouse life is that the lantern itself became a kind of focal point for the keeper's attention, a place where routine and purpose came together in a single continuous task. Standing here, you begin to understand that everything leads back to this. The cleaning, the adjustments, the monitoring, the quiet preparation. It all centers on the light. You take a slow breath and let it out. The room feels steady. Outside, the world shifts and changes. The wind gathers strength, the sea responds, the sky thickens with cloud. Inside, the lantern holds its course, offering a sense of continuity that feels almost grounding. You glance once more toward the horizon. The light of day continues to spread, but the softness has been replaced by something more muted. The clouds have taken hold, filtering the brightness into a subdued, even tone. You know what that means. The evening may come earlier than expected. You turn back towards the staircase. There is more to do below. Preparation does not end here. It moves with you from one level to the next, from one task to another. You step through the doorway and begin your descent once more, the spiral guiding you downward as steadily as it brought you up. You descend with a steadier pace this time, your steps more certain, your balance already adjusted to the narrow curve of the staircase. The warmth fades gradually as you move downward, replaced by the cooler, damp air that settles into the lower levels of the tower. It feels familiar now, less like a contrast and more like a natural shift between spaces. Your hand trails along the central column, fingers brushing its smooth surface as you pass each turn. The motion is automatic, almost unthinking. You're beginning to move within the lighthouse rather than through it. The landing with the tools passes by again, and this time you do not even glance toward it. The objects there have already taken their place in your awareness. They exist as part of the environment, ready when needed, but no longer demanding attention. You reach the base and step into the living quarters. The room feels quieter than before, though that may simply be your perception changing. The sounds you noticed earlier, the faint crackle of the stove, the subtle shifts of wood and stone have settled into the background. They are still there, but they no longer stand out. They have become part of the rhythm. You move to the window without hesitation. Outside, the change is unmistakable now. The sea has darkened slightly, its surface reflecting the thickening clouds above. The swells rise higher, their movement less uniform, more layered. The wind presses more firmly against the structure, not enough to rattle it, but enough to make its presence known. You rest your hand against the frame and lean closer. Visibility has begun. Not dramatically, not in a way that obscures the horizon entirely, but enough that distant shapes appear softer, less defined. The line between sea and sky blurs slightly, the contrast diminishing as the light becomes more diffuse. A well-attested practice in lighthouse service was the use of sound signals, such as bells or foghorns when visibility dropped and the light alone could not guide ships safely. You glance briefly toward the outer structure where such equipment would be housed and consider the possibility. Not yet, but soon, perhaps. You straighten and step back. The room feels smaller now, though it has not changed. Your awareness has expanded, stretching outward to the sea, and returning here feels like narrowing your focus again. It's not uncomfortable, just different. You move to the table and place your hands against its surface, grounding yourself. The wood is cool beneath your palms. You take a slow breath. The air inside carries a faint heaviness now, a subtle shift that mirrors what you sensed outside. It is not oppressive, but it is noticeable. You can feel the pressure of the coming weather even within these walls. There is work to do. You turn toward the supplies again, this time with more intention. The oil container you lifted earlier catches your eye. You crouch and pick it up once more, testing its weight, confirming your earlier impression. Enough for now, but not enough to ignore. You set it aside closer to the centre of the room where it will be easier to reach when the time comes. The movement is small, but it carries a sense of preparation that feels necessary. An unusual note from maritime life suggests that some keepers preferred to complete as many tasks as possible before a storm fully arrived, not out of fear, but because the changing conditions made even simple actions more complicated. You can understand that now. The wind, the shifting light, the subtle tension in the air. All of it suggests that ease will not last. You stand and move toward the door. Opening it again, you step outside, and the difference is immediate. The wind is stronger now, not violent, but steady in a way that demands attention. It presses against your coat with more insistence, tugging at the fabric, slipping through small gaps at your collar and sleeves. The air feels colder as well, though the temperature itself may not have dropped much. It is the movement that changes how it feels. You step forward and stop. The sea responds in kind. The swells rise higher, their peaks more defined, their breaks against the rocks, sharper, more forceful. The sound carries further now, a deeper resonance that fills the space around you. It is not overwhelming, but it is no longer gentle. You watch closely. The horizon has softened further, the line between sky and water becoming less distinct. A faint haze seems to gather, not quite fog, but something that reduces clarity just enough to matter. You narrow your gaze. There, a shape, a vessel distant and partially obscured, moving slowly through the shifting light. You track it carefully, noting its position, its direction. It appears steady, but the conditions around it are changing. Those who study coastal navigation sometimes debate how much sailors has relied on visual landmarks versus sound and instinct when visibility deteriorated, especially in regions known for sudden fog. As you watch the distant ship, that question feels immediate rather than abstract. You turn slightly, glancing back at the lighthouse. The tower stands firm, its presence unchanged despite the growing tension in the air. The lantern above continues its slow rotation, though its beam is now faint in the daylight. Soon it will matter again. You return your attention to the sea. The vessel fades from view, swallowed by the haze. You remain still for a moment longer, listening. The waves, the wind, the distant, indistinct sounds that carry across the water. Everything blends together into a single layered presence. It is not lance, but it is not clarity either. You step back. The ground beneath your feet feels less certain now, not because it has changed, but because your awareness of it has sharpened. Each movement requires a little more attention. You turn and head back toward the door. Inside, the lighthouse feels steadier. The walls hold, the floor remains firm. The sounds return to their quieter forms. You close the door behind you and stand for a moment, letting the shift settle. Above you, the lantern continues its motion. Outside, the weather builds. Between those two you move, adjusting, preparing, learning. The quiet balance that this place demands. You remain by the door for a moment after closing it, your hand still resting against the wood, as if feeling for the outside world through its solid surface. The wind presses faintly against it, a steady reminder that the conditions beyond are continuing to shift. Inside, the air feels steadier, though not entirely separate. The lighthouse does not isolate you from the sea. It filters it. You step away slowly. The room greets you again in its quiet, familiar arrangement. The table, the stove, the small shelf with its few personal items. Nothing has changed, and yet your awareness of it has. The space feels more defined now, more purposeful. You're not simply occupying it, you're using it. You move toward the stove and check it again. The fire holds low and consistent, the added wood burning down at a steady pace. You adjust it slightly, nudging a piece into a better position. The small movement produces a soft crackle, a faint shift in the glow behind the metal door. You close it gently, Ego. The warmth remains subtle, but it matters. You turn and glance toward the shelf. The book is still there, its worn cover resting where you left it. You hesitate for a moment, then step closer and pick it up again. This time you open it with a clearer sense of intention. The entries continue in the same steady hand. Dates. Observations. Small notes that mark the passage of time in a place where days might otherwise blend together. Wind increasing through afternoon. Visibility reduced by evening haze. Supply vessel delayed. You read a few lines, then pause. There is something about the tone that stands out. It is calm even when describing conditions that are not. There is no urgency in the writing, no dramatization, just a record of what is. A practical insight drawn from Lighthouse records suggests that keepers often adopted a restrained, matter-of-fact tone in their logs, focusing on accuracy rather than emotion even during difficult conditions. You can see that here. The writing does not tell you how the keeper felt. It tells you what happened. You close the book again and set it back. The act feels deliberate, as if you're placing it back into a rhythm that you're beginning to share. You step back and move towards the centre of the room. The air feels slightly heavier now, though not oppressive. It's a subtle change, one that you might not notice if you are not paying attention. But you are paying attention. You glance toward the staircase, then back to the door. The decision forms quietly. You will check outside again. Not because you must, but because you can. You open the door and step out. The wind meets you with more presence than before, pressing against your coat, moving with a steadiness that feels more intentional. It is not gusting wildly. It is building, layering itself in a way that suggests it will continue to grow. You take a few careful steps forward. The ground feels slightly different under your boots, less firm in places where moisture has begun to settle. You adjust your footing instinctively, your balance shifting with small, controlled movements. You stop and look outward. The sea has changed again. The swells are higher, their peaks more defined, their breaks are more forceful against the rocks. The sound carries more weight now, a deeper tone that fills the air around you. The horizon is hard to read. The haze has thickened, softening the line between sky and water until it is almost indistinguishable in places. Distant shapes appear and disappear, their outlines uncertain. You scan slowly. Nothing immediate. No clear sign of distress, but the conditions are no longer gentle. A lesser-known detail from coastal communities notes that lighthouse keepers sometimes developed informal signals or habits when interacting with nearby fishermen, or passing vessels, small gestures or patterns of observation that were understood without being formally recorded. You wonder briefly how much of that unspoken communication exists here. You watch the water a little longer. A wave rises higher than the others and breaks with more force, sending a spray that reaches farther than expected. You step back instinctively, avoiding the worst of it, though a few droplets catch your coat. Cold, sharp. You wipe them away without thinking. The wind shifts slightly, not in direction but in intensity. It presses more firmly now, moving around you rather than simply against you. You feel it at your back, along your sides, slipping through small gaps in your clothing. You take a slow breath. The air carries a faint edge, not harsh but noticeable. You turn your head slightly, listening. The sound of the waves has deepened their rhythm, less, even more layered. Beneath the main movement there are smaller, sharper sounds, subtle but present. Those who examine maritime life sometimes question whether the psychological experience of isolation was shaped more by the physical environment or by the lack of human interaction. Standing here with the wind and sea filling every available space, the idea of silence feels almost abstract. There is always something here, always a presence. You glance back toward the lighthouse. The tower stands firm, unchanged its structure, offering a steady counterpoint to the movement around it. The lantern above continues its quiet rotation, though its light is now barely visible against the muted daylight. You return your gaze to the sea. The haze shifts slightly, opening a brief window of clearer visibility. For a moment you catch sight of a distant shape again. A vessel, perhaps the same one you noticed earlier, though it is difficult to be certain. It moves steadily, then fades once. Once more. You remain still for a few seconds longer, letting the scene settle into your awareness. Then you turn and head back inside. The door closes behind you with a familiar solid sound. Inside, the lighthouse gathers you in again. The air feels steadier. The sounds quieter, though still present. You move towards the table and rest your hands against it, once more grounding yourself in the space above the lantern turns. Out to the side, the weather continues to build, and you stand between them, learning the rhythm, not through instruction, but through repetition, observation, and the quiet understanding that grows with each passing hour. You linger at the table a little longer, this time your hands resting flat against the wood, as if feeling for something steady beneath the surface. The room holds its quiet shape around you, but there is a faint awareness now that the outside world is pressing closer, not physically, but in presence. The wind, the shifting sea, the thickening air, all of it seems to lean toward the lighthouse, testing its edges. You lift your hands and straighten. Your attention moves toward the shelf again, though not to the logbook this time. Instead, you notice a small folded paper tucked beside it. It is worn at the edges, creased from being handled more than once. You pick it up carefully and unfold it. A letter. The handwriting is different from the logbook, less rigid, more personal. The lines are slightly uneven, as if written in a place where the surface was not entirely stable. You read a few words, brief updates, a mention of weather inland, a note about supplies, nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, but something unmistakably human, a connection to a world beyond this tower. You fold it again and return it to its place. An established detail of lighthouse life in the 19th century is that supply boats often delivered not just essential goods, but also letters that served as a keeper's main link to family and society beyond the isolated station. You can imagine the anticipation of those arrivals, the way time might stretch between them. You glance toward the door. There is no sign of a boat today, only the steady rise of wind and the muted horizon. You move toward the corner where the supplies are kept and begin a more thorough inspection. Not hurried, not anxious, but deliberate. You check the oil containers again, this time counting them, noting their condition. You run your fingers along the edges of the lids, ensuring they are sealed properly. You move to the cloths, lifting one then another. Each one carries the faint scent of oil, and use their fibres stiff in places, softer in others. You fold them again, aligning them neatly. Then the tools. You pick up each one in turn, not to use them, but to feel their weight, their balance. To become familiar. The brush, the scissors, a small wrench whose purpose you have not yet fully encountered. You place them back carefully. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in accounts of lighthouse life is that some keepers developed an almost ceremonial way of arranging their tools, placing each item in a precise position, not strictly required by function, but by a sense of order that helped them think clearly. You notice yourself aligning the edges of the cloths more carefully than necessary. It feels right. You stand and step back. The room looks the same, but you see it differently. Each object has a place, each place has a purpose. You turn toward the staircase, then pause. Not yet. There is something else. You move back to the door and open it once more, stepping outside into the strengthening wind. The change is immediate. The air presses against you with more force now, no longer gentle, no longer merely present. It moves around you, across you, carrying a weight that was not there before. Your coat shifts with it, the fabric pulling slightly as the wind finds its way through every small opening. You take a step forward and stop. The sea has grown more restless. The swells rise higher, their peaks sharper, their breaks louder. The sound is fuller now, filling the space around you with a constant layered rhythm that leaves little room for anything else. The horizon's nearly gone. Yet. The haze has thickened into something more substantial. Not quite fog, but close enough that distant objects fade quickly from view. The line between sea and sky dissolves, replaced by a continuous expanse of muted grey. You narrow your eyes, searching. Nothing clear, only shifting shapes that refuse to hold their form. Those who have studied lighthouse operations sometimes reflect on how quickly conditions could change along this coastline, turning a calm morning into a challenging afternoon with little warning. As you stand here, that transition feels less like a sudden shift and more like a steady progression, each stage building on the last. You take another step, then another, moving slightly closer to the edge, though still keeping a careful distance. The ground feels less stable now, not because it is moving, but because your awareness of it has sharpened. Each placement of your foot requires more attention. Each shift of weight is more deliberate. A wave breaks against the rocks with a force that sends spray higher than before. You step back instinctively. The droplets reach you anyway, scattered across your coat and face, cold, sharp, immediate. You wipe them away and exhale slowly. The wind carries a faint sound that was not there earlier. You listen. It is subtle, almost lost beneath the movement of the sea, but present. A distant low tone, not quite a bell, not quite a call, something that could be a vessel signalling its position in the reduced visibility. You tilt your head, slightly focusing, then it fades. Those who examine maritime records often discuss whether sailors relied more on formal signals or on their own judgment when navigating through uncertain conditions, especially when visibility dropped unexpectedly. The thought lingers as you stand there listening to the fading echo. You glance back at the lighthouse. The tower stands firm, its presence unchanged despite the shifting conditions. The lantern above continues its quiet rotation, though its beam remains faint against the daylight. You turn back toward the sea one last time. The view offers no new clarity, only motion, only sound. You nod slightly as if acknowledging something unspoken and turn back toward the door. Inside, the lighthouse feels more enclosed now, not smaller but more defined. The contrast between inside and outside has grown sharper. The walls hold steady, the air settles. You close the door behind you and stand still for a moment. The rhythm continues. Above, the light turns. Outside, the wind builds. And you move between them, preparing not for a single moment, but for a sequence that is already unfolding. You remain still for a few seconds after closing the door, letting the contrast settle into your body. Outside, the wind pushes and shifts, carrying the restless sound of the sea. Inside, everything holds. The difference is not silence, but control. The lighthouse does not block the world beyond. It tempers it. You move slowly toward the stove. The warmth feels more important now, not stronger, not brighter, but more necessary. You open the small iron door and check the fire again. The wood has settled further, the embers glowing steadily, their quiet heat continuing to fill the room in a way that feels dependable. You add another piece. It catches slowly, the flame building with a soft, patient crackle. You close the door and rest your hand briefly against the metal surface, feeling the warmth travel into your palm. There is comfort in that. You turn and glance toward the window. The light has dimmed slightly, though it is still morning. The thickening cloud cover has begun to filter the brightness, softening everything into muted tones. The sea, visible through the glass, looks darker now, its surface less reflective, more textured. You step closer. The view is more difficult to read. The haze has grown denser, blending the horizon into a continuous stretch of grey. The movement of the waves remains visible, but distant details fade quickly, leaving only suggestions of shape. A widely recognised fact about lighthouse service in northern coastal regions is that winter and storm seasons often demanded constant vigilance, as sudden shifts in weather could reduce visibility and increase danger within a matter of hours. You can feel that truth now, not as an abstract idea, but as a quiet pressure that settles into your awareness. You step back from the window. The room feels slightly smaller, though nothing has changed. It is your focus that has narrowed, drawn inward by the growing uncertainty outside. You move to the table and sit. The chair creaks faintly beneath you. Its sound familiar now. You rest your hands on your knees and take a slow breath. The air carries a faint heaviness, not unpleasant but noticeable. It feels as if the atmosphere itself is shifting, becoming denser, more present. You sit there for a moment, listening. The wind presses against the walls in a steady, persistent way. Not sharp, not violent, but constant enough to remain in your awareness. The sea answers with its own rhythm, the sound of waves rising and falling with increasing force. There is no urgency yet, but there is movement. An odd but occasionally mentioned detail from accounts of isolated keepers is that some would develop a habit of timing their thoughts to the rhythm of the waves, using the steady repetition as a way to remain calm during long hours of watchfulness. You notice the pattern, now the rise, the break, the pause. It settles into you. You stand again. Sitting feels too passive now. The conditions outside demand attention, even if they do not yet require action. You move toward the supplies, once more checking them again, not because they have changed, but because you have. The oil containers are still secure. The cloths are still in place. The tools remain where you left them. You nod slightly, acknowledging the order. You move toward the staircase, your hand finding the central column without hesitation. The metal is cool, steady beneath your fingers. You look upward, following the curve of the steps as they lead back to the lantern. It is time to check again. You begin to climb. The motion feels more natural now, your body adjusting to the rhythm of the ascent. Each step follows the last with quiet certainty. The air warms gradually as you move upward, the scent of oil becoming more pronounced. You pass the landing without pause. The tools remain where they were, unchanged, waiting. You continue. The sound of the mechanism above grows clearer, that steady measured movement that never quite leaves your awareness. It is comforting in its consistency, a reminder that some things remain stable even as the world outside shifts. You reach the top and step into the lantern room. The warmth greets you again, along with the steady presence of the light. The flame burns as it should, its shape controlled, its brightness balanced. The lens continues its slow rotation, bending the light outward in a steady arc. You step closer. The glass reflects both the flame and the muted daylight beyond, creating a layered effect that shifts as the mechanism turns. You watch it for a moment, noting the consistency. Everything appears in order. A thoughtful observation found in historical discussions suggests that the most effective keepers were those who trusted their routine enough to notice even the smallest deviation from it. You look carefully now, not just to confirm that things are working, but to understand how they should feel. The flame holds steady. The mechanism turns smoothly. The glass remains clear. You move to the reservoir and check its level again. It has dropped slightly as expected, though not enough to require immediate action. Still, you take note. The evening will demand more. You adjust the wick just a fraction, refining the flame's shape. It responds, then settles again into its controlled form. You step back. Outside, the view has changed further. The haze has thickened the horizon, nearly gone. The sea moves with more force now, its surface rougher, its rhythm less even. The wind presses against the glass, not enough to shake it, but enough to make its presence known. Those who examine lighthouse history often debate whether the greatest challenge of the role was physical labour, or the constant mental awareness required to monitor an ever-changing environment. Standing here, you feel that awareness more than anything else. You are not exhausted, but you are attentive, always. You turn slowly, taking in the entire lantern room once more. The light, the glass, the mechanism all working together in quiet precision. Then you move back toward the staircase. There is more to prepare, and the day is not yet finished. You descend again with a steadier rhythm, your steps falling into a pattern that now feels familiar, almost automatic. The lantern room fades behind you, its warmth and steady light replaced gradually by the cooler, quieter air of the lower levels. The scent of oil softens, giving way once more to damp stone and faint traces of wood smoke. Your hand remains on the central column as you move the contact, grounding you in the narrow spiral. Each turn brings you closer to the living space, closer to the place where preparation and waiting meet. You pass the landing without slowing. The tools remain undisturbed. You reach the base and step into the room. The shift is immediate. The sounds are softer here, though no less present. The stove continues its quiet work, the fire inside steady and controlled. The window admits a muted light that feels more subdued than before, filtered through thickening cloud and growing haze. You move toward it again. The sea is harder to read now. The horizon has nearly disappeared, replaced by a continuous field of grey, where sky and water blend together. The movement of the waves is still visible, but distant shapes no longer hold their form. Everything feels closer, more contained. You rest your hand against the frame and lean slightly forward. The wind carries a deeper tone now, not louder but fuller. The waves answer with a heavier rhythm, their breaks more forceful against the rocks. You can feel the vibration of it faintly through the ground, a subtle transmission of energy that travels upward into your awareness. A firmly grounded historical reality is that many lighthouse stations were located near notoriously dangerous shoals and rocky coastlines where shifting visibility could turn even familiar waters into serious hazards. You can sense that's truth now without needing to see it clearly. The danger is not always visible, it exists in the conditions themselves. You step back. There is something about the room that feels more enclosed now, though its dimensions remain the same. The outside world presses closer, not physically, but in presence. The wind, the sea, the muted light. All of it seems to lean inward. You move to the table and rest your hands against it once more. The wood feels cooler than before. You take a slow breath and let it out. The rhythm of the lighthouse continues. Above you the lantern turns. Outside the weather builds. Between those two you remain. A curious anecdote found in some coastal accounts mentions that keepers occasionally spoke of hearing faint voices carried by the wind during storms, sounds that could not be clearly traced to any source, often dismissed as imagination shaped by isolation. You listen now, not expecting anything, but aware of how easily the mind might begin to fill the gaps left by reduced visibility. There is only wind, only waves, only the steady presence of the structure around you. You move away from the window and begin another careful check of the room, not because anything has changed, but because the act itself, miso, reinforces your awareness. You adjust the position of a tool, slightly straighten a cloth that does not need straightening, ensure that everything remains where it should be. Each movement is small, each one matters. You step toward the door again. The decision to go outside forms quietly, not out of urgency, but out of habit that is already taking root. You open it and step into the wind once more. The force is stronger now. It presses against you with a steady insistence, moving your coat, pulling at your sleeves. The air feels colder, sharper, carrying a fine mist that touches your face almost immediately. You take a careful step forward. The ground demands attention. Moisture has settled across the surface, making it slightly slick in places. You adjust your footing instinctively, each step deliberate, controlled. You stop and look outward. The sea is no longer calm. The swells rise higher, their peaks sharper, their breaks more forceful. The sound fills the air, a continuous layered presence that leaves little room for anything else. Visibility has dropped further. The haze has thickened into something closer to fog, though not yet complete. Distant objects are almost entirely obscured, appearing only as faint suggestions before disappearing again. You narrow your gaze. Nothing clear. No vessels. No landmarks. Only movement. Those who examine maritime history sometimes question how sailors maintained their sense of direction in conditions like this, where visual reference points vanished and sound became the primary guide. Standing here, you can understand the challenge. The world narrows not in distance but in clarity. You listen. The wind carries a low continuous tone blending with the deeper rhythm of the waves. There is no distinct signal, no clear indication of another presence. Just the environment itself filling every available space. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavier now. Not oppressive, but sort of dense. You step back. The lighthouse behind you offers a steady presence, its structure unchanged despite the growing intensity outside. You turn and move toward it, your steps careful, your awareness focused. Inside the shift is immediate. The air settles, the sounds soften, the walls hold. You close the door and stand still for a moment, letting the contrast settle into you once more. Above the lantern continues its steady rotation. Outside, the sea and wind build towards something more, and you remain between them. Not controlling either, but maintaining the balance that this place requires. You stand just inside the door for a moment longer than before, as if allowing the weight of the outside world to settle before moving again. The wind presses faintly against the wood behind you, a steady reminder that conditions continue to shift beyond these walls. Inside, the air feels more contained, though not entirely separate. The lighthouse does not silence the sea. It reshapes how you experience it. You step forward slowly. The room greets you in its familiar arrangement, yet your attention moves differently now. You are not simply noticing objects. You are measuring them against the growing tension outside. The table, the stove, the shelf, the supplies. Each one becomes part of a system you are responsible for maintaining. You move toward the stove again. The fire holds steady, its glow low but consistent. You open the iron door, briefly checking the arrangement of wood and embers. Everything sits as it should. You make a small adjustment, shifting a piece slightly to keep the burn even. The sound is quiet. A faint crackle, a soft shift. You close the door and straighten. The warmth feels less like comfort now and more like necessity. You turn toward the shelf and pause. The logbook rests where you left it, its presence steady and unchanged. Beside it, the folded letter remains a quiet link to a world that feels increasingly distant as the weather builds. You consider picking it up again, but decide against it. Not now. There is work to focus on. You move toward the center of the room, and then to the staircase, your hand finding the central column without hesitation. The motion feels natural now, your body already accustomed to the rhythm of the climb. You begin to ascend. The steps carry you upward in that familiar spiral, each turn bringing a gradual shift in air and sound. The scent of oil returns, the warmth increases, and the steady mechanical presence above becomes clearer with each step. You pass the landing. The tools remain untouched. You continue. A frequently cited fact in Lighthouse administration is that periodic inspections were carried out by officials who travelled between stations, ensuring that keepers maintained proper standards of operation and record keeping. The thought passes through your mind as you climb, not as an immediate concern, but as part of the larger system you now belong to. You reach the top and step into the lantern room once more. The warmth gathers around you, the light steady and controlled. The flame burns cleanly, its shape consistent, its brightness balanced within the lens that guides it outward. You step closer. The glass reflects both the interior light and the muted grey of the outside world, creating a layered effect that shifts as the mechanism turns. You watch it carefully, noting the consistency in its movement. Everything appears in order. You move to the burner and make a small adjustment to the wick, refining the flame's height with a careful turn. It responds immediately, then settles into a steady form. You wait. This moment of watching, of confirming, feels just as important as the adjustment itself. You glance toward the reservoir. The level has dropped slightly again, still not urgent, but closer to the point where action will be needed. You take notes, storing the information quietly. A small but interesting detail from Lighthouse accounts mentions that some keepers developed personal ways of marking time during their watch, not relying solely on clocks, but on the sequence of tasks and observations that filled their day. You can feel that pattern forming now. The checks, the adjustments, the pauses, they create their own sense of time. You step back and move toward the glass. Outside, the change is unmistakable. The haze has thickened into something closer to fog, though it still shifts and moves rather than settling completely. The horizon is gone entirely now, replaced by a continuous field of muted grey where sea and sky blend together. The waves rise with more force. Their peaks are sharper, their breaks louder, sending spray higher against the rocks below. The sound carries upward, filling the lantern room with a low, constant presence that underlies everything else. You rest your hand lightly against the frame. The glass vibrates faintly, not visibly, but enough that you can feel a subtle tremor where metal meets structure. The wind has grown stronger, pressing against the tower in a steady, unrelenting way. You watch closely. No vessels, no clear shapes, only movement. Those who analyse lighthouse records sometimes question how much of a keeper's experience was shaped by external events versus the internal perception of those events, especially during long periods of reduced visibility. As you stand here, the distinction feels less important. The environment and your awareness of it are intertwined. You turn back towards the centre of the room. The mechanism continues its steady rotation, unaffected by the conditions outside. The gears move with quiet precision, each part fulfilling its role without hesitation. You watch them for a moment. There is something reassuring in that consistency. You move toward the doorway and begin your descent again. The spiral draws you downward, the warmth fading the air, cooling the sound, softening as you return to the lower levels. You reach the base and step into the room once more. The interior feels steadier, though the presence of the outside world remains. You move toward the table and rest your hands against it again, grounding yourself in the familiar surface. The wood is cool. Solid. You take a slow breath. There is no urgency yet, but there is no stillness either. You glance toward the door, then toward the staircase, aware that your movement between these spaces has become part of the rhythm itself. Above, the light continues its steady arc. Outside, the wind and sea build towards something more defined, and you remain within it, adjusting, observing, maintaining the quiet balance that this place requires. You remain by the table for a moment, your palms resting flat against the wood, as if feeling for steadiness through it. The room holds its shape, but the atmosphere has changed. It feels tighter now, not physically smaller, but more contained, as though the outside world has drawn closer and is pressing gently against the walls. You lift your hands and turn towards the far corner. There are small things to tend to. Not urgent, not dramatic, but necessary. The kind of quiet maintenance that prevents larger problems later. You crouch slightly and inspect the lower edge of the wall where it meets the floor. A faint line of dampness has begun to gather there, subtle but visible if you know where to look. You press your fingers lightly against the stone. Cool. Moist. You straighten and reach for a cloth, wiping the surface in slow, deliberate motions. The dampness does not disappear entirely, but the act itself feels important. A small correction. A way of staying ahead of the environment rather than reacting to it. A widely noted fact in lighthouse construction is that coastal towers were constantly exposed to moisture and salt, requiring ongoing attention to prevent gradual deterioration of materials. You can feel that truth in the texture of the walls, in the way the air carries a faint trace of dampness even inside. You move along the edge, checking other areas. Most are dry. And dries. One or two show similar signs. You address them in the same quiet way, not rushing, not ignoring. When you finish, you stand and take a step back. The room looks unchanged, but it feels maintained. You turn toward the door and pause. The wind presses more firmly now, its presence unmistakable, even through the barrier of wood. The sound of the sea carries with it, deeper and more insistent than before. You open the door. The air meets you with immediate force, not violent, but strong enough to demand attention. It pushes against your coat, moves around your body, finds every small opening and slips through with cold precision. You step outside carefully. The ground feels different, more uncertain. The moisture has spread, making the surface slick in places. You adjust your footing with small, controlled movements, placing each step deliberately. You stop and look outward. The sea is fully restless now. The swells rise higher, their peaks breaking with more force, sending spray into the air that the wind carries farther than before. The sound fills the space around you, a continuous presence that leaves little room for anything else. Visibility has dropped further. The haze has thickened into a shifting fog not yet settled, but dense enough to obscure distant shapes almost completely. The horizon is gone. The world feels closer, more enclosed, defined by what you can see rather than what lies beyond. You narrow your gaze. Nothing clear, only motion. A peculiar detail found in some coastal traditions mentions that certain keepers would mark the changing intensity of storms not by the instruments but by how far the spray reached along the rocks and into the air. You glance at the edge, noting how the water now climbs higher than it did earlier. You take a slow breath. The air carries a sharp edge. The wind has grown stronger. You turn your head slightly, listening. The sound is layered and now, waves, wind, a faint intermittent tone that could be something else, though it fades too quickly to confirm. It might be a distant vessel. It might be the wind moving through an unseen structure along the coast. You cannot be certain. Those who study maritime communication sometimes question how reliable sound signals were in conditions like this, where wind and wave could distort or carry them in unexpected ways. The thought lingers as you listen to the shifting tones around you. You step back, closer to the lighthouse. The structure stands firm behind you, its presence steady despite the growing force of the environment. You turn slightly, looking up toward the lantern. The light continues its slow rotation, faint in the daylight but consistent. You return your gaze to the sea. The movement is relentless now, not chaotic but powerful. You remain for a moment longer, letting the scene settle into your awareness. Then you turn and move back inside. The door closes with a solid grounding sound. The shift is immediate. The wind softens. The sound of the sea becomes more distant. The air settles. You stand still for a moment, allowing your senses to adjust. Then you move. The room calls for attention again. You return to the supplies, checking them once more, though you already know their condition. The oil containers remain secure. The cloths are in place. The tools are where they should be. You move to the staircase. Your hand finds the central column without hesitation. You look upward. The lantern waits, not urgently but steadily. You begin to climb again. The steps carry you upwards, the familiar spiral guiding your movement. The air warms gradually, the scent of oil, returning the steady mechanical sound, becoming clearer with each turn. You reach the top and step into the lantern room. The warmth gathers around you. The light holds steady. You move to the lamp and check it again. The flame remains balanced. The glass remains clear. The mechanism turns without interruption. Everything is as it should be. A thoughtful observation often mentioned in discussions of lighthouse work is that reliability is built not through dramatic effort but through consistent, repeated attention to detail. Standing here, you can feel that truth in every small action you take. You adjust the wick slightly. You check the reservoir. You observe the movement of the lens. Then you step back. Outside, the fog thickens. The wind presses harder. The sea rises. Inside, the light continues, and you remain between them, steadying one against the other. You remain in the lantern room a little longer this time, not because anything appears wrong, but because the space demands a different kind of attention now. The fog outside presses closer to the glass, drifting in uneven layers that shift and fold over one another. The world beyond the tower has narrowed not in distance, but in clarity. You move slowly around the perimeter. Each step is measured, your hand occasionally brushing the railing as if confirming the solid presence of the structure. The warmth of the lamp settles into your skin, steady and contained, while the coolness of the glass reminds you how thin the boundary is between inside and out. You pause at one panel and lean slightly forward. The sea is barely visible now. Only fragments of movement appear through the fog, rising and falling shapes that suggest waves rather than show them. The sound, however, has grown fuller, deeper, filling the space with a constant rhythm that feels almost physical. You listen. There is a pattern there, though less regular than before. The rise, the break, the pause. It continues, but with subtle variations that keep your attention engaged. A well-established fact from lighthouse operations is that in conditions of reduced visibility, keepers were required to rely more heavily on sound-based navigation aids, ensuring that fog signals were active and functioning properly to guide ships that could no longer depend on sight alone. The thought settles into your awareness as you stand there. You glance toward the mechanism below the lamp, then toward the outer structure where such signals would be maintained, not yet fully engaged, but approaching. You turn back towards the center. The lamp continues its steady burn, the flame controlled and precise. You crouch slightly, checking the wick again. It remains well adjusted, though you make a minor refinement, turning the mechanism with careful precision. The flame responds, then steadies. You watch it for a moment longer than usual. Not because you doubt it, but because the conditions outside make its reliability feel more significant. You stand again and move to the reservoir. The level has dropped further. Still not critical, but close enough that you begin to plan your next action more clearly. You will refill soon. Not immediately, but before the evening demands it. A lesser-known habit among some keepers was the practice of marking expected refill times based on experience rather than strict measurement, developing a sense for how long the lamp could sustain itself under varying conditions. You consider that as you step back. You are beginning to understand how such intuition forms. You turn toward the staircase. The descent feels different now, not because the steps have changed, but because your awareness has shifted. The work is no longer simply about completing tasks. It is about maintaining continuity, ensuring that nothing slips, nothing's overlooked. You begin to move downward. The spiral carries you gently, the warmth fading the air, cooling the sounds, softening as you return to the lower levels. You pass the landing. The tools remain undisturbed. You reach the base and step into the room. The interior feels steadier, though the presence of the outside world remains close. The wind presses against the walls with more insistence now, its sound deeper, more sustained. The sea answers with its own rhythm, the two blending into a constant background. You move to the table and sit. The chair creaks softly beneath you. You reach for the logbook. This time you open it with purpose. You dip the pen into ink and pause, considering the words before they form. The act of writing feels different from reading. It requires you to define what you have observed to give it structure. You begin, wind increasing steadily. Visibility reduced. By far, sea rising, a regular pattern. You stop. The words are simple, but they hold meaning. A consistent requirement in lighthouse service was the maintenance of accurate logs, not only for daily operation but for broader records that could inform future decisions and understandings of coastal conditions. You can feel that responsibility now, even in these few lines. You close the book and set it aside. The act feels grounding. You stand again. The room feels more contained now, the outside pressing closer, the inside holding firm. You move toward the stove and check it once more. The fire remains steady, though you add another piece of wood, ensuring that the warmth will continue. The flame responds quietly. You close the door. You turn toward the window. The view has narrowed further. The fog has thickened, the sea almost entirely obscured. Only the closest movement remains visible, the rise and fall of waves near the rocks, their motion more forceful now. You watch for a moment. Those who have examined lighthouse records sometimes suggest that the act of writing and observing served not only a practical purpose but also helped keepers maintain a sense of clarity during long periods of uncertainty. You can understand that now. The act of noting what is happening anchors you. You step back. The rhythm continues. Above the light turns. Outside inside you prepare. You move towards the supplies again, your hand reaching for the oil container with more certainty this time. Soon, very soon, you lift the oil container with both hands, this time feeling its weight settle more clearly into your grip. It is not difficult to carry, but it demands attention. The metal is cool, faintly slick from the dampness that lingers in the air, and you adjust your hold slightly to keep it steady. You pause for a moment, not out of hesitation, but to prepare. Then you turn toward the staircase. The climb begins again, slower now, more deliberate. Each step is taken with care, your balance shifting not only to accommodate the narrow spiral, but also the added weight in your hands. The central column remains your guide, your shoulder brushing it lightly as you move upward. The air warms as you ascend. The familiar scent of oil grows stronger, blending with the faint heat that gathers near the lantern. The sound of the mechanism above returns to your awareness steady and precise, unchanged by the conditions outside. You pass the landing. The tools remain in place untouched. You continue. A commonly documented requirement in lighthouse operation was the careful handling of fuel, as spills or contamination could affect both the efficiency of the lamp and the safety of the keeper. The thought settles quietly into your movements as you climb. You're not rushing. You're not distracted. You reach the top and step into the lantern room. The warmth surrounds you immediately. The light continues its slow rotation. The flame, steady within the lens that shapes it into something far greater than itself. The fog outside presses close to the glass, now softening everything beyond into a muted, shifting grey. You move carefully toward the lamp. The container remains steady in your hands as you position yourself beside the reservoir. You set it down gently, ensuring it rests securely before releasing your grip. Then you prepare to refill. The process is simple in structure, but it requires precision. You open the reservoir, the faint scent of oil rising slightly as the seal breaks. You lift the container again, tilting it slowly, controlling the flow. The liquid moves with a quiet, measured sound. You watch closely. Too fast and it could spill. Too slow and you waste time. So many steps. You find the balance. A small curious note from some lighthouse accounts mentions that experienced keepers could judge the level of a reservoir by the subtle change in sound as oil was poured, a shift in tone that signaled when to stop without needing to look directly. You listen as you work, noticing the way the sound changes slightly as the container empties. You adjust your angle, then stop. You straighten the container and set it aside. The reservoir is filled. You close it carefully, ensuring the seal is secure. The act is deliberate, each motion controlled as if the process itself demands respect. You pause, not to rest, but to observe. The flame remains steady. The mechanism continues its slow, even rotation. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels reinforced. You step back. Outside, the fog presses closer still. The glass carries a faint trace of moisture now, not enough to obscure your view entirely, but enough to soften it further. The sea is almost invisible, its presence defined more by sound than by sight. You move toward the edge and place your hand lightly against the frame. The vibration is more noticeable now, subtle but present. The wind has grown stronger. You watch the shifting grey beyond the glass, though there is little to see. Some researchers who have examined lighthouse logs have questioned how keepers maintained their sense of direction and awareness during extended periods of fog when visual reference points disappeared entirely. As you stand here, you begin to understand that awareness does not depend solely on sight. It draws from sound, from rhythm, from the feel of the structure around you. You turn back towards the centre of the room. The lamp remains your focus. You check the wick, again, making a slight adjustment to ensure the flame remains balanced after the refill. It responds immediately, then settles once more into its steady form. You watch it for a moment longer. Then you nod slightly, satisfied. You move toward the doorway and begin your descent. The spiral carries you downward, the warmth fading the air, cooling the sounds, softening as you return to the lower levels. You reach the base and step into the room. The interior feels steadier, though the presence of the storm continues to press inward. The wind moves against the walls with more force now, its sound deeper, more sustained. The sea answers with its own rhythm, the two blending into a continuous presence. You set the empty container aside. Your hands feel faintly slick, the scent of oil lingering on your skin. You wipe them with a cloth, the motion slow, deliberate, as if marking the completion of the task. A thoughtful observation found in studies of lighthouse life suggests that many keepers developed a strong sense of satisfaction from completing routine tasks correctly, even when those tasks were repeated daily. You can feel that now, not pride exactly, but a quiet sense of completion. You move towards the window. The view offers little. The fog has thickened further, the sea almost entirely obscured. Only the closest movement remains visible, the rise and fall of waves near the rocks, their motion more forceful than before. You listen. The sound fills the space. You step back. The rhythm continues. Above, the light turns. Outside, the storm builds. Inside, you prepare. And for now, everything holds. You remain near this window for a while, though there is little to see. The fog presses close to the glass, shifting in slow, uneven layers that reveal nothing beyond the nearest stretch of water. The sea exists now, more in sound than in sight, its movement carried inward through the walls as a deep, steady rhythm. You step back. The room feels more enclosed than before, not in size, but in sensation. The outside world has narrowed to a presence rather than a view, and everything inside takes on a sharper clarity as a result. You turn toward the table. The logbook rests where you left it, the ink still fresh on the last entry. You do not open it again. There is nothing new to record that you come to confirm with certainty. Instead, you rest your fingers lightly against its cover, acknowledging its place in the rhythm of your work. Then you move away. There is a different kind of task forming now, not one of maintenance, but of awareness. You step toward the door and open it once more. The wind meets you with greater force than before, pushing against you in a steady, insistent way. It is no longer something you simply notice. It is something you must account for in every movement. You step outside carefully. The ground is slick now, the moisture spreading across the surface in a thin, uneven layer. Your footing adjusts instinctively, each step deliberate, controlled. You stop and listen. The sea is louder, not just in volume, but in depth. The waves strike with more force, their breaks carrying a heavier tone that fills the air around you. The wind moves through it, shaping the sound, stretching it, bending it in ways that make it difficult to separate one from the other. You turn your head, slightly focusing. There, a sound, faint, intermittent. You listen more closely. It comes and goes, carried unevenly by the wind. A low distant signal. Possibly a bell, possibly a horn. It's difficult to tell. The fog distorts it, shifting its direction, altering its tone. A recognized feature of coastal navigation during periods of heavy fog was the reliance on sound signals from both ships and shore stations, allowing vessels to announce their presence when visual contact was impossible. The thought settles into your awareness as you stand there. Someone is out there. You cannot see them, but they are there. You take a slow breath. The air feels colder now, the wind sharper as it moves across your face. It carries a fine mist that settles against your skin, small droplets that gather and disappear almost immediately. You step slightly closer to the lighthouse, keeping its solid presence at your back. The sound comes again, faint, then gone. Some historical accounts suggest that lighthouse keepers occasionally developed a sense of familiarity with the signals of regular vessels, recognizing patterns or intervals that allowed them to identify ships even without sight. You wonder if that is possible here, if such recognition could form over time. For now, the sound remains uncertain. You listen once more. Nothing. Only wind. Only waves. You remain still for a few seconds longer, letting the environment settle into your awareness. Then you turn and step back inside. The door closes behind you with a firm, grounding sound. The shift is immediate. The wind softens. The sound of the sea becomes more contained. The air steadies. You stand still for a moment, allowing your senses to adjust. Then you move. Your attention shifts toward the staircase again, though not immediately upward. You pause at its base, your hand resting against the central column as you consider the rhythm of your movement. Up, down, inside, outside. Each motion has become part of the work. A thoughtful reflection found in some analyses of lighthouse life raises the question of whether the routine itself served as a form of structure that helped keepers maintain their sense of time and purpose in an otherwise unchanging environment. You can feel that structure now. It is not imposed. It is lived. You begin to climb. The steps carry you upward once more, your body adjusting to the motion without resistance. The air warms gradually, the scent of oil returning the steady mechanical presence above guiding your attention. You reach the lantern room and step inside. The warmth gathers around you. The light continues its slow, unwavering rotation. You move toward the glass. The fog presses close, its movement more pronounced here where the wind meets the structure directly. The surface of the glass carries faint traces of moisture, small droplets forming and sliding slowly downward. You watch them. Their motion is quiet, almost delicate in contrast to the force of the storm beyond. You turn toward the lamp. The flame holds steady. The reservoir is full. The mechanism turns without interruption. Everything is as it should be. A small but interesting observation from lighthouse records notes that during severe weather, the keeper's greatest responsibility was often not to make large changes, but to ensure that nothing failed under pressure. You can feel that now. The work is not about doing more. It is about maintaining what is already in motion. You step back, outside. Outside, the sound continues. Inside, the light endures, and you remain between them, steady, attentive, present. You stay in the lantern room a while longer, not out of uncertainty, but because this is where your attention feels most needed. The fog presses tightly against the glass, now moving in slow, uneven swirls that catch the light and bend it into faint, shifting patterns. The outside world has nearly disappeared. What remains is sound motion and the steady sweep of the beam. You move along the circular edge, your steps quiet, your hand occasionally brushing the railing. The metal feels warm, carrying the heat of the lamp and the constant motion of the mechanism beneath it. There is something grounding in that contact. The tower feels alive in a quiet way. Not through movement you can see, but through the steady function of everything working together. A firmly established fact from lighthouse engineering is that many towers were designed to withstand powerful coastal storms, their thick masonry and curved forms helping them resist wind and wave forces that would damage less robust structures. As you stand here, you can feel that strength not as a dramatic force, but as a quiet resistance. The wind presses the tower holds. You stop near one panel and lean slightly forward. The sea is invisible now. Only the closest waves reveal themselves rising and falling in brief glimpses before dissolving back into the grey. The sound, however, is unmistakable. It has grown deeper, more forceful, filling the lantern room with a constant presence that underlies everything else. You listen. There is a rhythm, though it shifts from moment to moment. A larger wave breaks with a heavier sound, followed by smaller, sharper patterns that echo behind it. The wind moves through it all, shaping the sound, stretching it, carrying it in uneven bursts. You turn your head slightly. There, again, a distant signal, faint but clearer this time. A low, prolonged tone that rises above the sound of the sea just long enough to be noticed before it fades again. It could be a foghorn from a vessel. It could be a signal from another station. The fog distorts it, making direction difficult to determine. You listen carefully. Nothing. Then again, slightly different. Those who examine maritime practices often note that in dense fog, sound becomes both more important and more deceptive, carrying farther in some moments and disappearing entirely in others. The experience can be disorienting even for those accustomed to it. You can feel that now. The signal is real, but its meaning is uncertain. You remain still for a few seconds longer, focusing. Then you step back. Your attention returns to the lamp. It remains steady, unchanged. The flame holds its shape, the wick balanced the reservoir full. The mechanism turns with its usual precision, guiding the beam outward into a world that may or may not see it. You crouch slightly and make a small adjustment to the wick, refining its position with careful control. The flame responds, then settles again into its steady form. You watch it, satisfied. A curious note from some keeper journals suggests that during severe weather, many keepers found reassurance in the smallest successful adjustments, treating each stable moment of the light as confirmation that their efforts were holding against the conditions outside. You understand that now. The steadiness of the flame feels more significant than it did earlier. You stand and move toward the doorway. The descent calls. You step into the spiral and begin to move downward. Your pace measured, your hand steady against the central column. The warmth fades gradually as you descend, replaced by the cooler, heavier air of the lower levels. You reach the base and step into the room. The interior feels more enclosed now, the outside world pressing closer than ever. The wind moves against the walls with a deep, sustained force, and the sound of the sea fills every quiet space. You move toward the door. There is no hesitation. You open it and step outside. The wind meets you immediately, stronger than before. It pushes against you with a steady force that demands attention. Your coat shifts the fabric, pulled tight in places, loose in others, as the air moves around you. The mist is heavier now, settling against your face, your hands, your clothing. You take a careful step forward. The ground is slick. You adjust your footing, each movement deliberate. You just stop and look outward. The fog has thickened further. The world is reduced to a narrow space around you. The lighthouse at your back, the immediate stretch of ground beneath your feet, and the restless sea just beyond. A wave rises higher than the rest and crashes against the rocks with a force that sends spray into the air, carried by the wind in a wide arc. It reaches you. Cold, sharp. You step back instinctively. The droplets scatter across your coat and face, their impact immediate and fleeting. You wipe them away and listen. The sound of the sea is louder now, its rhythm less even, more forceful. The wind moves through it, creating a layered, shifting pattern that fills the air. And then, there. The signal again, stronger this time. A low resonant tone that cuts through the surrounding noise just long enough to be recognized before it fades. You turn your head, trying to place it. Impossible. The fog distorts direction. You listen again. Nothing. Those who study lighthouse work sometimes discuss how keepers had to trust their senses without over-interpreting them, recognizing signals while also understanding their limitations in uncertain conditions. You can feel that balance now. The sound matters, but it does not provide clarity. You step back towards the lighthouse. The structure stands firm behind you, its presence steady against the force of the wind. You glance upward, briefly, knowing the light continues its work above even if it cannot be seen from here. You turn and move inwards. The door closes with a solid, reassuring sound. The shift is immediate. The wind softens. The sound of the sea becomes more contained. The air steadies. You stand still for a moment, letting the contrast settle. Then you move, back toward the center of the room, back into the rhythm. Above, the light continues. Outside, the storm holds, and you remain between them. Steady, attentive, ready. You remain in the center of the room, letting the echo of the outside world fade into the steady interior. The walls hold firm, the stove continues its quiet work, and the familiar arrangement of objects around you restores a sense of balance that the wind had begun to unsettle. Your breathing slows, not because the storm has eased, but because you have adjusted to its presence. You move toward the table again, your hand brushing lightly across its surface as you pass. The wood feels steady beneath your fingertips, a simple, grounded contrast to the shifting uncertainty beyond the walls. You do not sit this time. Instead, you remain standing, your attention divided between the room and the sounds that continue to press inward. The wind has deepened. It no longer feels like a passing force. It has settled into a sustained pressure, a constant movement that does not pause. The sea answers with equal persistence, its rhythm heavier, more forceful, filling the space beneath everything else. You turn toward the staircase. The thought comes without hesitation. Check again. You place your hand on the central column and begin to climb. The movement feels slower now, not because of fatigue alone, but because your awareness has sharpened. Each step is deliberate, each shift of balance is measured. The air warms as you ascend the scent of oil, returning the steady mechanical sound above guiding your focus. You reach the lantern room and step inside. The warmth surrounds you immediately. The light continues its steady rotation, unchanged, reliable. You move toward the lamp and check it carefully. The flame holds. The wick remains balanced. The reservoir is full. Everything is as it should be. A frequently cited observation in lighthouse history emphasizes that the true measure of a keeper's work was consistency, the ability to maintain the light without interruption regardless of external conditions. Standing here, you can feel the weight of that expectation, not as pressure but as purpose. You step toward the glass. The fog presses tightly against it now, the outside world reduced almost entirely to sound and suggestion. The movement beyond is visible only in fragments, brief shifts in tone and texture that hint at waves rising and falling. You rest your hand against the frame. The vibration is stronger now, still subtle, but present. The wind has not lessened. If anything, it has settled into a deeper, more sustained force. You listen. The sea continues its heavy rhythm. The wind moves through it. And then, there, the signal again. Clearer this time. A low, extended tone that rises above the surrounding noise holds for a moment, then fades. You remain still, listening. It comes again, slightly different in length. Those who have analysed coastal navigation often reflect on how keepers had to interpret incomplete information, relying on fragments of sound and shifting conditions to form a broader understanding of what might be happening beyond their sight. You can feel that now. The signal is real, but its source remains uncertain. You turn back toward the lamp. The flame remains steady. The mechanism continues its slow, precise motion. Nothing here reacts to the storm, and that is the point. You stand there for a moment longer, letting the steadiness of the lantern settle into you. Then you turn and begin your descent once more. The spiral carries you downward, the warmth fading the air, cooling the sounds, softening as you return to the lower levels. You reach the base and step into the room. The interior feels more contained than ever. The outside presses close the wind and sea, filling every gap in awareness. But the structure holds, the space remains defined. You move toward the stove. The fire continues its quiet burn, the warmth steady, reliable. You add another piece of wood, ensuring that it will continue through the coming hours. The flame responds softly. You close the door. You turn toward the window. There is little to see. The fog has fully taken hold. The sea is reduced to sound. You listen. Those who study the lives of lighthouse keepers sometimes debate whether the greatest challenge of the role was the physical demands or the mental endurance required to remain attentive in long periods of limited visibility and isolation. As you stand here, you can sense that endurance forming not as strain, but as a steady extension of your awareness. You step back. The room feels steady. The rhythm continues. Above, the light turns. Outside, the storm persists. Inside, you and you remain. A small and curious detail from some keeper accounts mentions that during prolonged storms, individuals would sometimes mark time not by hours, but by the number of times they checked the lantern, each cycle becoming its own measure. You consider that briefly. You've already lost track of exact time, but not of the work. You move toward the center of the room and stand still for a moment. The balance you holds. For now, you remain standing in the center of the room, letting the steady rhythm of the lighthouse settle fully into you. The storm outside has reached a kind of balance, not weakening, not intensifying further, but holding in a sustained state that feels almost constant. The wind presses the sea answers and the fog keeps the world close and contained. You take a slow breath. There is no urgency now, only continuation. You turn toward the staircase once more, your hand finding the central column with quiet familiarity. The climb feels different this time. Not new, not difficult, but known. Your body understands the motion your steps fall into place without hesitation. You ascend this. The air warms gradually, the scent of oil returning the steady mechanical sound guiding you upward. Each turn of the spiral feels less like effort and more like part of a cycle that has already repeated many times. You reach the lantern room and step inside. The warmth gathers around you. The light continues its slow, unwavering rotation. You move toward it. The flame remains steady. Its shape controlled, its brightness balanced within the lens that carries it outward. The glass holds clear despite the moisture that gathers along its surface, the droplets sliding slowly downward in quiet patterns. You stand close, watching. This is the center of everything. A broadly accepted truth in lighthouse service is that the light itself was never allowed to fail, not for a moment, regardless of weather or circumstance. That responsibility does not feel heavy in this moment. It feels steady like the flame itself. You reach out and make a final careful adjustment to the wick. A small correction. The flame responds, then settles. You watch it for a few seconds longer than usual. Satisfied, you move toward the glass. Outside, the fog presses tightly, the world beyond reduced to sound and suggestion. The sea continues its deep, constant rhythm, the wind moving through it in layered patterns that fill the space. You rest your hand lightly against the frame. The vibration is still there. Steady, unchanging. Those who reflect on lighthouse lives sometimes wonder whether keepers came to see the light as something separate from themselves, or as an extension of their own responsibility, a presence that depended entirely on their attention. Standing here, the distinction feels less important than the connection. You turn back toward the center of the room. Everything holds. The flame, the mechanism, the structure. You take a slow breath. Then you step toward the doorway and begin your final descent of this cycle. The spiral carries you downward, the warmth fading the air, cooling the sounds, softening as you return once more to the lower room. You step inside. The space feels steady, grounded. You move to the stove and check it one last time. The fire burns low but stable. Enough! You add a small piece of wood, not to build the flame but to maintain it. The sound is soft, a gentle crackle. You close the door. You turn toward the window. There is nothing to see, only fog, only the faint suggestion of movement beyond. You listen. The storm continues, but it no longer feels like something approaching. It is simply present. A quieter reflection, sometimes found in historical writing, suggests that over time, lighthouse keepers adapted not by resisting the environment, but by moving in harmony with it, allowing its rhythms to shape their own. You can feel that now. You step back from the window. The room holds. The lighthouse holds. You move to the center and sit. The chair creaks softly beneath you. Your hands rest loosely in your lap. You take a slow breath in and let it out. The sounds continue around you, but they no longer demand your attention in the same way. They exist steady and constant part of the background rather than the focus. Above, the light continues its work. Outside, the sea and wind persist. Inside, you rest. The rhythm does not stop. It simply softens. Your awareness begins to widen again, no longer fixed on each individual sound, each movement, but allowing them to blend into something continuous. The crackle of the faint hum of the mechanism above, the distant layered sound of waves and wind, all of it together. You shift slightly in the chair, finding a more comfortable position. Your shoulders relax. Your breathing slows. There is nothing more to adjust right now, nothing more to correct. Everything is in place. The light is steady. The structure holds. The storm continues, but it does not overwhelm. It surrounds. It moves. It passes through. You remain, quietly, steadily. And as you sit there, the boundaries between sound and silence begin to blur, the steady rhythms of the lighthouse and the sea blending into something softer, something more distant, something that no longer asks anything from you. The light continues its slow sweep across the unseen water. The wind carries its constant tone. The waves rise and fall in their endless pattern, and you let it all drift, gradually, gently, until the edges soften, until the effort fades, until the steady presence of this place becomes something you no longer need to hold on to. You simply exist within it, calm, still, at rest. Sweet dreams.